Now, I just want to preface this video with saying, if you're expecting PLZA spoilers, leaks, analysis of, more information on the Terra leak, wind and waves, you're not going to find that here. This is not that kind of video. We are not that kind of channel, and there's probably half a dozen, actually probably hundreds of videos on channels that do that better than I ever could hope to do. This is really just me wanting to talk about two things I really love, and noticing just a lot of really similarities between them, and just the really just bizarre connections that they share. So I'm a bit more positive in the dark times right now. So, before we get into everything, I want to thank you guys. Nintendo and Godzilla. More or less Japan's two biggest icons, in no small part for Nintendo due to Pokémon. It shouldn't be surprising that they've worked together for a long time, yet it somehow still surprised me. After all, both Pokémon and Godzilla are about giant monsters battling for our amusement, and are equally aggressive in legal action. Maybe they share tips. Oh yeah, also, the head of Toho is on the board for Pokémon Company. Kind of buried the lead there. With Pokémon Legends ZA coming out, and both the complete full neuron activation of my Godzilla-tism and my Pokémon-tism going in full effect, this was a logical video to make. Do I love both of these series? Yes, I do. Do I have issues with both of them? Also, absolutely yes, I do. It is possible to criticize something you love. In fact, it is something I feel should actually be encouraged, because when you criticize the thing that you love, it shows that you want it to get better. If you are simply blindly devoted to it, are you truly a fan? But yes, these two companies have worked together and had a very, let's just say, peculiar relationship. As for the premiere of Godzilla Final Wars, the executive producer of the movie, and I apologize to the man, I am going to butcher your name, Shogo Tomiyama, I think that is correct, directly said that Pokémon, and specifically Pikachu, were Godzilla's biggest rivals, and hoped that Final Wars would finally win back the hearts and minds of children. This was in 2004. This was 2 months and 1 day after the release of Pokémon Emerald. In Japan only. By the way, it didn't release into the US until over a year later. That shows just how meteoric the rise of Pokémon was, even back then. It was already seen as a peer and rival to Godzilla, a series that was going on its 50th anniversary. The reason it's fitting is that Satoshi Tajiri, the man who created and came up with the idea for Pokémon, actually said one of his inspirations for just the basic concept of Pokémon, using monsters to battle and overcome obstacles, is actually derived from the tokusatsu show Ultra 7, a character that in the series utilizes these capsule kaiju to fight when he is unable to assume his epic tokusatsu transformation mode. In fact, the original name for the series, Capsule Monsters, was an homage to this inspiration, and one of the earliest pieces of concept art used to illustrate the concept features a battle between two creatures known as Gazellante and Gorillamo. While they were never meant to be Pokémon, the fact that the basic illustration for the concept devolves into Game of Godzilla vs. King Kong, I just find, yeah, that's pretty silly. But as for who am I am your dummy dinosaur, your American Allosaurus, Max Allo, inflicted with the giant monster robotism, and all things movie, gaming, and other assorted nonsense and stuff and things. If you enjoy that kind of stuff, don't forget to subscribe for more, comment your thoughts below, and leave a like on the video, all of which are exceptionally necessary, because YouTube, as usual, decides to just throw a monkey wrench into the algorithm. And we need your help to make sure the algorithm doesn't destroy us. The naming of those two characters, especially Godzilla, actually does make a lot of sense, since the development for what would become Pokémon began all the way back in 1990. This is why actually the original Red and Green, not Red and Blue, Blue was the international version, and actually the secondary version that was basically a hotfix on the original games, was started back in 1990. It has the longest development time of any Pokémon game. 6 years, because in those intervening years, they basically had to take on working on other games to kind of supplement making Pokemon. It was basically a passion project back then, and other games being developed was used to fund it. While they eventually were able to pitch it to Nintendo, who eventually accepted it. And the usage of that name makes sense, as back then, the most recently released Godzilla film was Godzilla vs. Biollante, which released in 1989. It just released. And by just released, I mean that thing released in December of 1989. So it literally just came out. It was fresh on probably everyone's mind. And King Kong is actually, for some bizarre reason, always been hugely popular in Japan. In an amusing twist, Godzilla's name, Gojira, actually comes from the Japanese word for gorilla and whale, meaning that it is gorilla named thing versus other gorilla named thing. So, not only do we owe Tokusatsu for the creation of Pokemon as a initial concept to Satoshi Tajiri, but really the pitching of it being told through kaiju. Though we can also blame that on the entire reason HMs exist, because the other purpose of the kaiju capsules in Ultra 7 was to surmount obstacles. Yeah, not only was it the inspiration for battling, but the object removal hindrance came from that too, so yeah. The worst mechanic in all of Pokemon has its roots in that same inspiration. I don't like HMs if you can't tell. I hate them. They're my least favorite part about replaying the older games. I mean, after all, Pokemon really does improve on perfection. Godzilla had already firmly established that on its own, kaiju battling can just be the concept of a series on its own rather than simply a feature. Pokemon is the gamification and logical extreme of such a course of action. And this relationship doesn't exclusively go one way. As mentioned in Godzilla Final Wars, there is that mention directly by the production staff towards Pokemon. But there's also a scene in the film itself rather early on where you have a youngling who is playing with a turtle, a blue bipedal turtle, smashing into a Kumonga figure, before calling it, "You loser," and throwing it into a fireplace.
You loser!
Many people take this to be a jab at Gamera, Godzilla's original rival, but because it is a blue bipedal turtle, it does very much resemble Squirtle, and many people take this to be somewhat of a reference to the Squirtle family, the Blastoise, and another pointed jab at Pokemon. Though this is not just one-sided antagonism. In a very weird meta-Ouroboros nature that is Godzilla, Pokemon would actually serve as one of the key inspirations for one of the MonsterVerse's newest kaiju, at least original kaiju, that being the Skullcrawler and Skulldevil. Toho is loosely affiliated with the movie, so it does still count in my books. And what Pokemon? Well, director Jordan Vogt-Roberts created the Skullcrawlers from a rather crazy fusion of influences throughout his entire life, mixing the two-legged lizard, which was introduced in the original King Kong movie, to Evangelion's first angel, whatever the freak that means, because I've never seen Evangelion, as well as No Face from Spirited Away, and Cubone. Yeah, this video basically started off as something of a shitpost attempt. It went a lot deeper than I thought it would, as you can probably tell from the runtime remaining in this video. This runs deep. I did not expect this, and it kind of melted my brain. In fact, the original intention for this video pretty much was going to be me covering the Pokemon that resembled a lot of the classic Toho Kaiju and really Kaiju in general, and that a lot of the Pokemon movies use a number of Pokemon, a lot of Godzilla sound library effects for a lot of legendary Pokemon's cries, as Toho does work with Pokemon Company on the production of the movies. This isn't just they gave access to the sound library, they are a part of the entire production process. Since we've gone over some of the influences on it as a series, and actually one of the Kaiju inspired by Pokemon, I think it's only fair that we actually go over the Pokemon that are directly based on or inspired by Kaiju. Obviously, the most obvious is Tyranitar, which is very clearly visually based on Godzilla, but his Japanese name, and please correct me if I say this incorrectly, Bungiris, I think that's how it is pronounced, is very similar to Japanese, the way that Anguirus' name is written, which is basically just that, just with the B chopped off, making him almost something of a self-contained reference to the entirety of Godzilla Raids Again, which would actually be very fitting. It is also believed that Tyranitar is itself derived from an earlier existing Beta Gen 1 Pokemon called, again I am probably going to mess this up, Gaion, which his name is supposed to be a bit of a pun on the onomatopoetic way that Godzilla's roar is written, even though we tend to write Godzilla's roar as a strionk. It is meant to resemble, a large reptilian creature, and is believed to have either inspired or influenced Tyranitar's later design, or been reworked into Tyranitar itself, as it is also believed to have a more Manila-inspired prior evolution, based on some beta Pokemon information. Fittingly along with this, there was another beta Pokemon called Omega, which resembles a machine that is reptilian, with finger force multipliers, and shoots missiles out of his fingers. A very clear similarity to the original Mechagodzilla, something which would make sense, again, given the time frame during which the concepts of Pokemon were actually being developed. That would have been probably the only Mechagodzilla in existence, as Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 did not come out until more than halfway through the development of Pokemon Red and Green. Another interesting little note about Gaion is that while Rhydon is listed as index number 0 in coding, Gaion is number 1, meaning that this was likely one of the first Pokemon ever designed. Tyranitar's Mega Evolution, Mega Tyranitar, is also believed to be based on Space Godzilla. You can see a very clear similarities. The giant shoulder spikes, the overall much more spiky design, the tail having that much more flared out crown-like look, the much more prominent head crest on Mega Tyranitar. However, Godzilla was not the only one that was homaged. We have in the Generation 3 anime, there is an entire episode which is a massive homage to Mothra, Caterpie's big dilemma, including everything from knocking over a large tower and evolving into Metapod and then finally Butterfree. Though for a much more clear-cut, or at least partially clear-cut reference, we have Volcarona, a Pokemon that I remember reading this once and cannot for the life of me find another thing citing it as a source, but just putting this under rumor, is a divine worshipped as a god moth by ancient people that, well, that obviously is known because the games every say it, to the part that is, can't really cite for a source for, as I do remember seeing it, is claimed that it was actually explicitly based on Mothra. However, to distance from Mothra and hopefully avoid the lawsuit hawks that are Toho, they added the extra set of wings and a sun motif again to try to differentiate it enough. Now, that may or may not be true, but it would track. Because again, Toho is notoriously litigious. So possibly apocryphal, but I still find it funny. And though it is commonly referred to as being an homage to King Ghidorah, Hydreigon, as actually stated by his designer, Ken Sugimori, is not based on King Ghidorah. He is actually based on Yamata no Orochi, and that the only reason he has 3 heads is because having 8 heads would be very unsettling and actually very unwieldy to have created, so the 3 heads was for greater simplicity. Though, Hydreigon does evolve from Zweilous at level 64. This may be a reference to 1964, the year in which Ghidorah the 3-headed monster was released, and as such, King Ghidorah debuted. There is also in the Pokémon anime, when Cameron's Hydreigon uses Tri-Attack, it is shown in a manner that is meant to evoke King Ghidorah's usage of his gravity beams, each of the 3 elements coming out of each of his mouths, including 1 lightning beam, and Hydreigon does learn the electric type move Charge Beam, which is possibly a reference to the fact that originally it was supposed to be a tank dragon, but considering it doesn't learn any other electric type moves other than really Thunder Fang, and I think that was even a later edition, it is a bit suspicious that it does learn that very particular electric move. The, of course, ever-always cited trio of Rhydon, Nidoking, and Nidoqueen bearing a resemblance to Baragon, all 3 bipedal, horn-bearing, rhinoceros, dinosaur-esque creatures that are bizarrely capable of learning energy beam firing attacks, despite being overwhelmingly physically based attackers. Also known for burrowing, which is one of Baragon's main skills, in addition, of course, to his Magma Ray. With Generation 8, we got Duraludon, which doesn't really bear that strong of a resemblance to Mechagodzilla, but the portrayal and reveal of Duraludon is directly meant to be in homage to the relationship between Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, showing this very standoffish antagonistic relationship these 2 heavyweights have with one another. So, much like with King Ghidorah not necessarily being directly homaged by Hydreigon, it is handled in such a way as to be portrayed as one. Further reinforced by the fact it does have a G-Max form, a giant skyscraper-sized kaiju-like form, something it shares with G-Max Butterfree. We also have, in Generation 9, Iron Jugulus, the futuristic paradox version of Hydreigon, somewhat a mechanized version of Hydreigon, can be seen as something of an homage to Mecha King Ghidorah, and most fittingly, Iron Thorns, a mechanical Tyranitar which is itself a much more direct Mechagodzilla reference, especially in its shiny coloration where it's all chromed out. But Gen 9 does have its own Godzilla reference much more directly in the form of Excalibur. Its singular colossal dorsal spike does bear a very strong resemblance to Godzilla's dorsal spike. It's, again, much more upright humanoid posture, brings to mind the typical tokusatsu Sudomation effect stance of kaiju, and the level of evolution, 54, suspiciously is the same as the debut year of The King of the Monsters, 1954. And this thematic extends the entirety of the family. Frigibax, the base form, its rather awkward design, almost frog-like, does actually bear a somewhat resemblance to Minilla, the younger son of Godzilla variant. And while it is often said that Arctibax bears a resemblance to either Godzilla Jr., I don't really see this. And this is gonna sound schizo, but bear with me on this. This game came out in 2022. Takashi Yamazaki had been working on Godzilla -1 since 2019. Let's compare Arctibax to Godzilla Jr., and then let's compare it to Premutation Godzillasaurus from -1. Which of these two does it look like a lot more? Now, I'm not saying Takashi Yamazaki is a Pokemon fan and he passed over some of his designs over to Pokemon, or Pokemon, got some early access to Godzilla -1 scripts and concept art. But I'm just saying, Archabax is the only one that has that more horizontal posture. Got that big, prominent dorsal spike. And we got Godzilla -1 with that really prominent dorsal spikes. Hunched back, horizontal posture. I'm just saying. Stranger things have happened. They do work together. Even the signature move of Baxcalibur, Glaive Rush, has Baxcalibur flip around and utilize its breath to propel itself forward to slam into the target, in a manner not that dissimilar to the way Godzilla launched himself to face Hedorah in Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Though in that case, Godzilla is still standing upright using himself basically as a rocket booster, whereas Baxcalibur is just kind of jump, run, and a little bit of propulsion. Same but different. It also really isn't even the first time that Nintendo would have crossed over with some of its game designs being, or the people who design some monsters to actually be shared between things. The designer of both Kaiser Ghidorah and Monster X, Katsuya Terada, also designed characters for The Legend of Zelda. And in The Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, there is a boss monster, Mothula, who is a very explicit reference to Mothra, showing that this relationship seems to run very deep. When it comes to the production of the Pokemon movies, this is actually where Toho again does get directly much more involved. While the extent to their influence on the movies is not exactly known, it is no surprise that many of the Pokemon movies end up playing out not that dissimilar to many of the classic Toho kaiju epics. After all, the entire series is more or less derived from the original origin point of Godzilla Raids Again. This pioneering and inventing this entire genre of battles being the main focus. Yes, battles had been between great titans in previous movies, most prominently back in the original King Kong between King Kong and the Meat Eater, but the battling was never the main point. It was more of a little side thing, and even then it was relatively short. Godzilla Raids Again and the subsequent mass construction of these for entertainment kaiju battle films showed battling can hold its own, just as a reason to be attended. And most Pokemon movies eventually just go this route of legendaries just battling it out on an epic, massive scale. So I wouldn't be surprised if you had a lot of the people at Toho who both weren't making Godzilla movies at the time, liked Godzilla, and had a little bit of input for some of those battles. Again, the fact that Toho grants usage of the sound library, giving many of the legendary Pokemon the same voices as many of these greats Toho created, all of which really started back in Generation 4 and has not abated since. In order, because I actually want to get all of them down, the first instance of any of the Godzilla sound library being used in Pokemon is actually all the way back in Generation 1's anime. In the episode Ditto's Mysterious Mansion, Jessie actually uses Godzilla's roar when she is yelling at Ditto. However, the first movie to start featuring these kaiju roars is The Rise of Darkrai. Palkia using a combination of Godzilla's roars and Heisei King Ghidorah's roars, mixed with Boga the Varactyl's roars from Star Wars Episode 3. Giratina in Shaman and the Sky Warrior utilizing Mothra's classic chirps, with the robot Giratina fighter jet thing utilizing Mega Gyrus' roars. Smash Brawl utilizes Palkia's movie cries, with Dialga ironically having Final Wars Manda's roars. Fitting I brought up Final Wars earlier, because again, it almost feels like that was intentional right there. For the Zekrom and Reshiram movies, Both Zekrom and Reshiram use a mixture of Megagyrus's cries with other kaiju for each one. Zekrom using Megagyrus's cries mixed with GMK Baragons, and Reshiram using a mixture of Megagyrus's cries with Kaiser Ghidorah's. Little bit weird that they didn't do the reverse, because Kaiser Ghidorah uses lightning-looking things and Baragon uses fire, but hey, I'm not the people at Toho, maybe they did it because it was funny. Which, honestly, I could see that. Kyrem in Kyrem vs. the Swords of Justice uses Zilla and Monster X's roars, which, that still shows that Toho keeps Zilla's stuff on file there. That is like one of the most official acknowledgments of Zilla, like, in existence from Toho, which I find hilarious. That it is because of Pokemon. Even something like as late as, over 10 years later, they still had, like, the Zilla stuff as officially. I just love that. I do like that Toho doesn't just treat Zilla as a punching bag, because it is very easy to do that, and they don't. I like that. I respect that. Yveltal does use Megagyrus' roars in later movies, DNC Cocoon Destruction. Within the third Mega Evolution special, Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre use a mixture of Godzilla and King Ghidorah's roars, and Mothra's classic chirps. And in Super Smash Bros. U, Lunala uses Mothra's chirps, and Solgaleo uses a shortened version of Baragon's roars. They seem to be very fond of Mothra and Megagyrus. But now we get to something I have kind of wanted to gush about for a while, and that's actually Pokestar Studios. And personally, I actually believe that as much as Pokestar Studios is based on the American movie industry, specifically Hollywood, I think that it's actually more of a love letter in equal measure to Toho itself. Very tellingly, whenever Pokestar Studios came up, or at least many of the earliest times it was brought up, it was under the umbrella of what are in the game, the big monster films, which you can participate in that sort of sub-area within the games. These utilize a giant Tyranitar, which eventually, after removing a fake skin, is found to be a robot, in a manner not that dissimilar and is explicitly a reference to the original Mechagodzilla. During one of these episodes, they are filming a movie in which this Mecha Tyranitar, called MT, does battle with a giant Golurk, summoned by a pair of twin fairies, and having said giant mecha be controlled by an alien. This, despite many of the issues of the Unova anime, is one of the best ways of showcasing and advertising features within the games. A sub-feature, a mini-game. It was just fantastic, because you get to see some fairly unique Pokemon-esque battles in a manner that really isn't just a high-tension battle. It's them filming a movie, but it's still a kaiju film, and you get to see, some of the different Pokemon abilities utilized in more unorthodox ways. They don't have two irises, so what do? They have a Zorua transform into a duplicate of Iris for the Shobijin analog scene. You have basically Pacific Rim versus Godzilla with Golurk fighting the Mega Tyranitar. It's like, this is how you build hype for a feature in a game that is so incredibly unorthodox. It shows us a small portion of it. And I'm kind of sad to say I never really did much with Pokestar Studios, and I did know about Big Monster, but just how much there is with it. The Black and White and Black 2 White 2, they really were just filled with so much love. In fact, actually in the game, during the filming of one of the Big Monster scenes, you actually fight a trainer known as Mysterious Man Sarazawa, who uses a Steel-Electric type Black Mecha Tyranitar 2. Obviously, yeah, I don't think I should really have to explain that one. Someday, we are going to be revisiting playing Black and White 2, and I do plan 100%ing it. So if you guys want to see that, comment your thoughts below, and I'll probably be linking that playlist here somewhere, because I did play that blind, and it really was a magical game. It's just such an interesting thing to see, since they're both very similar companies, again, more than just the kaiju concept in very different ways. They're absurdly litigious companies. Anything that passingly resembles Godzilla before the sketch is even finished, the Toho lawyer assassins are already sent there and they're on their way. Pokémon is much the same, just see Palworld and even actually my own experiences. Before Pecha Run had its event release, I literally scheduled a stream, had the thumbnail, and had Pecha in the title of that stream. The next day, after waking up, my channel was copyright struck for that. Didn't even have any footage or anything. They copyright something for having a name of a thing that was data mined, and apparently many others were as well. Nothing is too small for either of them. When my dad worked at Corning, they actually had a project commissioned for 2 massive lenses. It was called Project Godzilla, and the 2 lenses were called Godzilla and Mothra. The Mothra one was the bigger of the 2, and they made shirts for it with the name on it. I don't know if that was the name from the order from the people, or just an internal name for it because the people in charge thought it was a good joke. But somehow, within a matter of days, word got all the way back to Toho, and Dad mentioned, they got, Corning a cease and desist over that. Never did remember what it actually was supposed to be for. Maybe it was a telescope or something like that, because I'm still not 100% positive it wasn't for a government killsat. Which is why it's just all the more absurd that, something like Tyranitar is allowed to stand if there wasn't some collaboration, some kind of they're working together. It's almost just kind of like a comedic satire between these 2 companies. They're not really 2 sides of the same coin, but they're more or less co-workers. But at different levels, they know and don't know they're co-workers, leading to this just bizarre mix of respect, pettiness, cooperation, rivalry, and inspiration. There really is nothing like it anywhere else. It is still strange, though, that we don't have Super Godzilla on Nintendo Switch Online, though. I've wondered about that myself now. It's honestly part of why I am glad last week I got called in and I wasn't able to finish work on this, because I don't really think I would have been able to do as much for this as I did. Had I been doing this last week, it did kind of afford me more time. And I'm actually still worried about this video being a colossal kaiju mess. As I said earlier, this wasn't really going to be something about ZA. This is not that kind of video. This is really me just wanting to make a video on a topic that I had kind of been curious about for a while, and really just fell down the schizo rabbit hole on, and finding out that there's a lot more to unpack here than I first thought. It was a wild ride, and it really does make me want to go and replay Black and White and Black 2 White 2. Maybe when we finally do get the VTuber model, those are going to be some of the first games that we actually stream and we actually play, because I do really want to go 100%, Black and White 2. I love those games, and though oddly my first games I played were Kanto. Most people don't believe me. My starter was Venusaur I picked. I know, I'm basic. But, these are 2 series that I love, and they have hurt me, and they've also made me happy. It's very hard to just put into words. If you guys haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe for more, comment your thoughts below, like, and this is also how I am going to be telling you guys that the main channel, Maxis, we will be rebranding it. I have thought about this for about 2 years, and, with some of the developments involving ZA, I have finally decided that it is time to bite that bullet. It is time to begin the changeover. I have not really wanted to be bound strictly to Pokemon for a very long time, and I think it is time that we break from that change. The name Metagross Maxis is hopefully in the coming weeks going to be no more, and instead replaced with the new name, MKG. That's what that means. Well, you're gonna find out. This channel, it's not changing. We're still gonna be your Dummy Dynamax Vallow. But no, we do not have the VTuber model yet. That is still a work in progress. But yeah, that is really all. I want to thank you guys. Thank you for sticking with me through this just entire giant ramble fest. I hope you guys found it fascinating. And I mean, I know I did. But I'll see you guys next time. I got no clue what that's gonna be. Long live the Kaiju King.